Well, the Southampton International Boat Show has come to an end now, so all the boats are making their way home, and one of those boats is this, the new Sunseeker Predator 55. It comes hot on the heels of the dynamic new Superhawk 55, and it comes, happily enough, on a day like today with an enclosed saloon and a coupe style layout. So we're looking forward to jumping on board and seeing exactly what she can do. Now we're about to set off, so there's not a lot of time to lose, but before we jump on board, it's just worth a quick mention about the styling of this thing, because it's about 400mm loftier than the Superhawk, which stands to make it a little bit top heavy, but as you can see, they've used nice big windows and lots of black finishing just to lower that profile. And also it's a really very modern feeling boat, lots of angles in the mouldings, lots of faceted angles, nice deep plunging tinted windows, and a quite cool grey hull colour. And it doesn't end there. As you move towards the back, that's the Ocean 156 just setting off ahead of us. We'll go in convoy to Poole, step on at the back end, and you see even at the swim platform we've got angles all over the place. Now, it feels quite traditional because it's trimmed with natural teak, plantation teak, so relatively sustainable, but we still have these lovely angles above the swim platform. And the platform itself, well, that's strong enough to handle about 300 kilos. And what I particularly like about it is the fact that these steps here are part of the same unit. So when this platform drops down into the water, these also drop down to give you steps down to that platform. So that's a really very attractive touch. Now this is an American spec boat, so we don't have the passerelle which would go in here. Instead we got the shore power beneath that step and the water point on the other side. What we do have here though is this huge raised central unit, an enormous sunbed on top of there with built-in backrests for maybe 2 or 3 people. And inside here, because of that extra elevation, plenty more space for a proper tender. We're talking like a Williams 325 with additional space for your stand-up paddle boards and your sea-doos. Now, as you make our way up these port steps into the cockpit itself, one thing to mention is the fact that in order to lift the lid for that tender garage, you need to move these little cushions out of the way here, these little strips, just to give the hinges a bit of space. And another thing to mention is the fact that they're looking at adding kind of peripheral rails around this tender garage just to ease your passage up and down when you're moving fore and aft. As for the cockpit itself, well, fans of Sunseeker will know that the Superhawk has a nice big full beam cockpit that goes a good way forward with little side doors on either side of the helm. Not so here. We've got more traditional kind of side decks, a walk-around style design with these excellent protrusions off the back end of the superstructure, just so that when you're sitting at these settees, even underway at 30-35 knots, you get tremendous protection without diminishing your view. Now in terms of the layout, freedom of movement here is very good. We've got an L-shaped settee butting up against the back end of that superstructure on the port side, and we've got a relatively traditional aft bench here facing forward. I reckon you could easily seat 6 people around this table, which of course is configurable, and there's space here in the centre of the cockpit on this wide open deck for another couple of bits of freestanding furniture, so it's very easily a space for 8, perhaps even 10 at a squeeze. On the starboard side of the cockpit we've got a wet bar, which again nestles in the lee of this extension from the back end of the superstructure. We've got the optional barbecue on top there. We've got a nice little ice maker here, which incidentally is standard, a bin beneath there, and we've also got some switchgear there for the lighting and so on. But what I really like here is the fact that we have 4-part aft doors, so you can slide them all the way to port as they are now, or all the way to starboard. Slide them to starboard to better integrate the seating on that port side, but when you slide them to port like this, you can use this little worktop extension, this little infill, slide that into place just to give a better sense that the external wet bar and the main internal galley are properly integrated. And that's a sense that's helped in no small part by the fact that we also have a threshold-free single level deck all the way from this aft bench right forward to that helm on the starboard side. Now, the engine bay is accessed in the normal fashion through a hatch at the front end of the cockpit, and once you're down in there's some decent space. Now, of course, the tender garage does get in the way of that space a little bit, certainly towards the centre between those engines, but there is a kind of full section at the bottom end of that tender garage that can be lifted out to give you access down into that central part of the engine bay, where you'll find the generator and space at the aft end between the IPS drives for the optional Seakeeper 6. Now, in terms of the engines themselves, we got a pair of IPS 950s here, so that's D11 725s on very short jack shafts to the IPS drives, and that should give this boat, they tell me, around about 36 knots underway. But we're in the river now, just pootling along at 4 or 5 knots, so we'll make our way forward to the bow and take a look at that. And as we do so, it's worth noticing a couple of things already. Firstly, as I make my way onto the side deck, well, the lovely natural teak from that cockpit, that gives way to bare fiberglass, which feels like a little bit of a shame, if I'm absolutely honest with you. I'd like to see that continuing forward. What we do get though is this. In place of regular stainless steel guardrails, we just got a little lip at the top edge of these big windows that enables you to feel really secure as you make your way forward. Here's the skipper's side window. That incidentally is an option, but certainly one I'd look to take. And there's a side gate down here. Again, that's an option. Side gates on both sides just to improve your access to other boats and to the pontoon. And as we make our way right forward to the bow space, well, what we have here is quite interesting. Relatively elevated furniture with a forward-facing bench big enough for maybe 4 or 5 people, a compact table in the centre there. There's storage under there that goes right the way through, and you can access it through one of 3 individual hatches beneath these seats. And then further forward on this island sunbed, well, you can sit here quite happily and face the people on this aft bench. So, you know, it's a decent spot for dinner, or you can lift these up into position just to make it a little more comfortable when you're facing forward on this sunbed. Now, that's pretty practical, that works to a degree, but I've seen better mechanisms that enable you to do that, but at the same time also enable you to open up a backrest for facing aft, just to improve comfort in this sort of dinette area. And also I'd say that actually, although it's elevated, it's also relatively tight in here. So here's the prospect of clashing knees a little bit if you try to seat too many people around there. Either way, what I really do like is the forward edge of this sunbed. Now, it's substantially elevated from the deck, and that means that underneath here we've got a hatch, a permanent skylight, even when you've got people mounted on these cushions, mounted on the sunbed. So you're always getting light down below. And also, I like the storage. Now, I think they probably clip these down. They probably have, haven't they? So we can get out to sea. Yeah, and even if they hadn't clipped them down, these clips are way beyond my pay grade, I'm afraid. I really don't know how to operate them. But anyway, under here, what we do have is an enormous storage space, really easy access on good strong rams, so you can chuck all sorts of gear in there, from lines and fenders to baggage, whatever you like. And in fact, it's so voluminous you're tempted to call it a crew cabin. In fact, on some boats it probably would be. Now, when you step inside into the saloon, as I say, there's a single level deck that kind of invites you inside. Headroom is pretty good, in spite of the fact that it looks pretty sleek and low profile. And I have to say, the layout in here is pleasingly simplistic. We've got a big C-shaped dinette on the port side with a little ottoman, and you can spec that as a coffee table or a dining table if you prefer. And on the starboard side, a fore and aft galley. Now, I've pointed out, because of these clever 4-part doors, that you can slide them all the way to port and integrate these 2 sections, the wet bar and the galley. The idea is that you can slide them to starboard and integrate the seating areas on the port side, but realistically I don't think that's entirely effective, because if I sit here I'm facing forward, so whether that's open or not is irrelevant. And similarly, if you're sitting at that bench just out there that lines the back end of the superstructure, well, again, you're facing forward, so you're kind of looking away from each other. Now, I've talked to them about that, and they said that they have kind of investigated a few sort of clever galleon style innovations, but they've gone with this kind of fixed, relatively simplistic and traditional solution instead. Now, we've got air conditioning units under the aft parts of those that seating section, and a decent storage forward. And as for the galley itself, well, for a start, you don't have to have it up here. You can have it downstairs, and we'll talk about that again in a second. But what we get here is a fridge forward and a 2-ring electric hob in the centre with an oven. This is optional at the aft end, a pull-out dishwasher, a rather swanky colour. Not seen that before on a boat. That's from the new Sunseeker pallet. It's relatively elevated, so you've got a good comfortable work surface and plenty of that. There's also a bin built in here further forward, a sink aft, and a couple of high-level cabinets here. And this is quite interesting too. Flush mounted into the forward part of that cabinet, we've got this TV, and if I hit this button, I can angle this, let go of the button, and it fixes itself, and again, any angle you like, which means that with those doors slid to starboard, you can realistically sit out in the cockpit and watch that TV, which is quite a neat touch. But of course, you don't have to have it that way. As I say, this galley can be down below, in which case you can spec this with a nice settee instead, while still potentially having a TV that pops out of there. But before we move further forward, one thing I want to show you is this. We've got a little storage solution up top, a short drawer up at the seat level. But when you get lower down, this is quite cool. They've made really good use of the space. Look how long that is. Goes right into the base beneath those helm seats, makes great use of that space. And storage is a strength all over this boat. It's got proper cruising credentials in that regard. So if we come forward of this section, you might think this is just to conjure up a bit of extra volume down below. But look at that for a space, absolutely huge. Loads of space for all sorts of backpacks and God knows what else. Really, really useful feature, and brilliant for tidying away those quick grab items that otherwise tend to litter your saloon. Now when we come down below, what we want to see is the extra elevation this boat enjoys used profitably. And the moment you're down here, you think, well, actually, volume is pretty good. But actually, it's the flexibility of this space that is particularly interesting. Now, on this test boat, we have the VIP cabin in the bow. We have the owner's full beam master cabin amidships, as you'd expect. We have the day heads over to port. And on the starboard side, we have a twin cabin with a little utility room forward, but that's not the standard fit out. The standard fit out involves a big saloon on that starboard side with or without that utility room, or as I say, you can have the galley downstairs, in which case that's exactly where that goes. As I say though, this is the 3 cabin boat with a twin to starboard, VIP forward, owner's cabin amidships. But what I particularly like down here, and one reason why visibility is particularly good up in the saloon, is the fact that we've got a lovely big fridge freezer, full height, built into this bulkhead right here, just to the side of the access point to the VIP cabin. And that means that we only need a smaller fridge up top. You don't have a full height fridge freezer blocking your view. In any case, what we'll do first is go straight amidships and check out that owner's cabin. Now as I head aft, I should point out that on the way down those stairs we've got the distribution panel, which is a very useful spot for it. And I should also point out actually that this sand oak finish is really quite pleasant. They tell me that the most popular finishes for Sunseeker are the kind of darker mahoganies and eucalyptus finishes, and you can certainly have those, but for me this kind of a modern Nordic style sand oak is a lovely touch on this test boat. Now at the entrance point we got more refrigeration. As I say, you've got plenty on this boat. This is optional, of course. This is a wine fridge at the entrance point to the owner's cabin. We get the ensuite facilities here on the port side, proper hanging storage at the entrance point with automatic LEDs. And when you get in here, well, just like the saloon, what we have is an entire linear, undipping deck head. So it's fantastic. It's just as much headroom at the aft end as there is at the entry point, which is very rare indeed. Usually you see it dip a little at the head end just to encompass extra space up top in the saloon. But this is lovely. Plenty of access to both sides of the bed, which runs fore and aft here. We've got a TV mounted onto the forward bulkhead in a kind of picture frame. It's quite a neat and slick design, that. And on both sides we've got these enormous cabinets, these storage cabinets. Now there's a dressing table built into the starboard one. But if you like, you can replace that entire starboard section with a breakfast bar, a couple of seats and a central table, just for intimate little moments down below before you head up and join the rest of the party. If you do that, you would lose that dressing table, because I don't think it's part of the standard options list to shift it over here to the port side. But they do tell me that everything is possible. So you're pretty much free down here to have a play with the arrangement and make it suit the way you want to go boating. Now on the starboard side, this optional twin cabin is really quite pleasant. Again, there's plenty of headroom. Again, this sand oak is nice and bright. There's a decent bit of height to the beds. No storage under there though, I don't think, and they don't slide together. And unlike that owner's cabin aft, we do have a bit of a drop in the deckhead height, but there's still plenty of room to sit at the head end of the bed there and read a book. There's still a bedside table. There's still a dedicated cabinet for hanging storage with automatic lights, and there's still a lovely big hull window there, which is relatively deep as well as panoramic. But what's particularly interesting in here, if I open this forward door, is this. Now, as I say, there are options down here. It's very flexible. You can spec this as a little bathroom for this twin cabin, but really we've got that day heads on the other side of the room with Jack and Jill doors, so it makes plenty of sense just to use those facilities. Because if you're a keen cruiser, this is probably more valuable. This is a proper utility room with a washer dryer, with all sorts of storage options and with some additional work surface. And they're looking at augmenting the usability of this space by hanging up some rails, so you can just deposit your life jackets here, keep all the seamanship gear out of the way when you just want to close it up, keep the rest of the boat nice and neat and tidy. And finally, of course, we have the VIP cabin in the V of the bow. Now, on a couple of occasions, I've actually opened the fridge instead of this access door, which is possibly more down to my stupidity than a quirk with the design. But either way, once you're in here, there's again tremendous amounts of storage, hanging storage on both sides, plus additional solutions on the way in behind that fridge freezer. Another TV mounted on this aft bulkhead, and a central bed which is significantly raised, so you get additional storage under there. What I also like is the fact that this bed can be split. It's a V-berth, a scissor berth, so when you split it into two singles, you've got these little storage trays mounted on either side. You can simply slot those in the centre, so you've still got handy little trays even when you've got two individual beds. And even though we have this kind of dipping into the space, as the walkway makes its way around the bow there, well, if I perch myself up in this section of the boat right at the head end next to the reading lights, you'll see as a 6-footer there's plenty of room to sit up for a read. There's also really good views through these, again, very large hull windows. And what I particularly like is that hatch that we looked at earlier, that's always exposed just ahead of the island sunbed, well, it admits plenty of natural light and, if you like, ventilation down below. We're at the helm of the Predator 55 now, and we'll be learning together because this is my first moment at the helm. We don't have a great deal of time today, but what's immediately clear is the fact that visibility here is fantastic. I looked at the shape of this boat, I looked at that big crossbeam above this lovely single piece screen when we were on the outside, and I'm thinking, I've seen many boats where that actually gets in the way of the horizon, where the visibility is quite restricted, but actually it sits relatively high. So from a sitting position here, and the seat doesn't go up and down, just fore and aft, my views all around are really, really impressive. We've got these enormous side windows as well. This is an optional skipper's side window here. It's just so you can communicate with people out there on the pontoon, which is very handy. There's no such luxury for the port side. There's no option for a port side window, which for me is a bit of a shame, but at the same time we've got this massive, massive overhead sunroof, glass and carbon fibre. The entire thing shifts aft, so you can, in theory at least, stand up and communicate a bit out of that. And actually in the future they tell me that will be easier because they're going to devise some sort of fold down platform so I can actually elevate myself there at the helm, get my head above that crossbeam and see the horizon that way for proper wind in the hair boating, which is nice on a boat that essentially is not an open boat at all. Now as for the position itself, it's not an enormous helm. The fore and aft distance here is limited because we butt up against the galley behind here on the starboard side. But it's very, very well appointed. Everything you want is to your right hand. We've got the tab switches on the front of the throttle base. We've got the joystick here and the bow thruster as well. A couple of 16-inch plotters ahead of me and a compass on top. It's a very comfortable position indeed. But of course, this being a Predator, what we want to do is get her up and underway. So we'll have a little play with that right now. And as I say, we've got IPS 950s here. That's D11 725s. And we got the auto tab system working here. There's a little bit of bow lift as we get up and underway. But already we're doing 27 knots or so. It's very easily done. And this is not a particularly gentle day. We've got decent winds whipping these seas up into 2-3 footers. But actually the ride softness is pretty good. And as suspected, once you're up and underway, that slight bow elevation actually assists with the visibility, if anything. And what we'll do is push her on again, past 30 knots and up towards the top end. Now, as I say, they say that 36 and a half, 37 knots is a possibility with these engines. There are no options, these are the engines you get. But today we're pretty heavily loaded. So we've got 8 people on board, and in place of that grey water tank we've got an additional freshwater tank. So 2 freshwater tanks, both of which are full. That's the best part of an extra metric ton on top of the weight we're already carrying. So yeah, we're running heavy, but we're still seeing 34 and a half knots, 34.6. And as I say, that's very easily achieved. And what I particularly like here though, is not just how easy that is to achieve, it's the fact that whether we're doing 20 knots or the top end of 34 and a half, we're still seeing about 8.5 litres per nautical mile disappearing from our fuel tank. Now that's a bit more than the Superhawk 55, of course, because this is a heavier boat with extra structure and extra windage. That achieved about 7 litres per nautical mile. But on the basis of our twin 900 litre fuel tanks sitting on either side of that engine bay, if you save 20% redundancy, well, you've still got a usable cruising range of around about 170 nautical miles. And as I say, that is true whether you're doing 20 knots or 35. So if you're looking for a boat with a really wide, user-friendly cruising band, this is exactly that. Now it certainly feels as though the weight here is in the right position. It feels like quite a naturally balanced boat. So let's throw her about a bit and see how she does. We'll swing around to starboard first. And you see we got, oh, look at that. Look at all that heel. That is lovely. It's nice and acute. And when you straighten her back up, natural trim is very quick to regain. Swing her around to the port side. Again, it's very easy. And actually, even with these, this overhead sunroof shut, I've got tremendous visibility to port when I heel her right over like this, which is very handy. It means you don't have to open it up to sea when it's a slightly windy, cold and wet day like today. Now, in all honesty, as a 55-footer with a no options engine rig like this, you would expect her to perform well, particularly as I've already used these base underpinnings for that Superhawk 55. Of course, we've got no flybridge up top to elevate the weight. So even though we got that extra bit of windage, that extra bit of elevation, I was hoping it would perform well, and it really does. This new Predator 55 then is a pretty pleasing boat. It's certainly very good to look at. It's decent fun to drive. They made great use of the extra volume in there, and in many ways, of course, it's going to please more people in more ways than the Superhawk 55 was ever likely to achieve. But that is not the end of the Sunseeker 55-foot story, because if you like this boat but you think, well, a roof is wasted unless you have a flybridge, well, stay tuned, because at the end of next year they tell us they're going to be bringing out a 55 sport yacht with a little sport bridge based on exactly this footprint. Now, if that's exciting to you, please do leave a comment below. If you like the video, press like, and if you want more videos like this in the future, then please do subscribe to the Motorboat and Yachting channel.